Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio. We've got a returning guest today, Mr. Michael Cremo. Pretty excited to be talking to Michael again. Michael's live on the line with us as we speak, and if you haven't followed Michael's work before and you haven't caught the two previous shows, you can catch them in the archives, CapricornMembers.com, and you catch Capricorn Radio and Capricorn TV on YouTube, of course. Michael's formidable book is The Forbidden Archaeology, academic research it is. Of course, he has other works, The Human Evolution, and we covered also My Science, My Religion last time on the show. And we're going to get to, I think, all of this today. So without further ado, let's bring in our guest for today. Hi, Michael. Welcome back.
Good to be with you and all your listeners and viewers.
Oh, it's great to have you again. And, wow, Michael, you know, you've been a busy guy. You know, you're a veteran of radio. You know, you put such a lot of time and effort into, I guess, relaying the research to the public. You do a lot behind the scenes and you do a lot of research, Michael, but you do a lot of service as well, Michael. You're a veteran of, you know, I don't know how many shows you touch on. I mean, you do small shows, big shows. You just want to get the message out there of what this research is. It must really drain you, Michael.
Well, it's all part of what I do, and I enjoy every part of what I do. I enjoy doing the archival research. I enjoy going out into the field, visiting different archaeological sites, getting into museums, seeing what they've got in their collections. I enjoy the process of writing all that up. I enjoy the process of seeing a book get published, and I enjoy speaking about my work at scientific conferences, at universities, to public gatherings of all kinds. I enjoy going on all kinds of media, whether it's radio or television or web podcast or whatever the medium happens to be. To me, it's all part of what I do, and I enjoy all of it.
Wow, fascinating. You know, I actually, the last time we spoke, you gave me advice off the air, and you said to get out into conferences and get involved, and I've done that, you know, Michael, and it is an exciting part of this research is to go to conferences, meet people like yourself, other researchers, get to ask personal questions, and, you know, get to network with like-minded people, and I think we have such a growing body of conferences out there, East Coast, West Coast, UK, Europe. You know, it's like I see all these alternative researchers, and been on the show. I've been out to Bosnia myself and London and a few conferences, and it's just a growing body of conferences and a growing body of like-minded people soaking this stuff up. I think people are hungry for this in the public eye, Michael, and I think this is probably a good point to bring in your work. Because what you do, Michael, is you provide a Vedic alternative to Darwin. Perhaps you could explain why we need a Vedic alternative to Darwin.
Well, we need some kind of alternative to the current Darwinian theories of human origins and antiquity. And I'm happy to see a whole variety of alternatives out there for people to develop and choose from. It just so happens that the personal path that I've taken in my life in this world has led me to be inspired by the Vedic teachings of ancient India. You know, there's some researchers in the alternative history field that are very much influenced by Egyptian texts and the spirituality of ancient Egypt. Some are more inspired by the Sumerian texts of the Middle East. Some have other sources of inspiration, maybe different channeled sources or whatever. So there are a lot of alternatives out there. I think they all tend to share some common features, but I have personally been inspired by the Vedic teachings of ancient India, which, first of all, informed me that humans have been present on this planet for far longer than most scientists who accept the current theories of human origins are prepared to accept. And this idea of extreme human antiquity is not exclusive to the Vedic teachings of India. It's found in many of the world's ancient wisdom traditions, and it's, I think, a common feature of most of the alternative views that are out there today, namely that various aspects of human civilization and human origins are older than most scientists now think possible. So that's what inspired me to do the research for forbidden archaeology. I had encountered in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India the idea that humans have existed on Earth for many millions of years. So I had to think about that because it was something quite different than I had learned from my teachers in high school and university. So I had to wonder, is what I'm hearing from these ancient writings to be taken as mythology, or is there perhaps some factual basis for it? So that's what got me looking into the history of archaeology, and that research led to the book Forbidden Archaeology, which documents hundreds of cases of discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, human footprints, going much further back in time than most archaeologists are now prepared to accept.
Sure. I think for me personally, Michael, with Forbidden Archaeology, it satisfied something in me, Michael. And I mean, I was searching for origins of civilization. I was searching for anything to do with ancient history, something to tell us where we came from, where all the megalithic guys, got their knowledge from, why Egypt is advanced at its earliest stage, and then, and it's just not making sense in the mainstream anthropological data or archaeology data. And I got more than I bargained for with Forbidden Archaeology, but I did get something satisfied in me that you have provided a wealth, and I mean a serious wealth of information with regarding archaeology, showing us there is a deep antiquity of mankind. I guess, what's the oldest anomaly in your book? What's the oldest thing we got in there, Michael?
Well, in terms of human footprints, the oldest ones that we uncovered in our research were some footprints discovered near Antelope Springs in Utah by a man named William Meister. He was a fossil hunter, and he was out hunting fossils one day. He had one of these geologist little hammers, and he was breaking open pieces of rock, and he broke open one piece of shale rock, and inside he saw footprint, not a footprint actually, a shoe print. Not the print of a naked foot, but the print of a shoe. And in the middle of the shoe print was crushed an ancient fossil shellfish called a trilobite,
wow,
which is characteristic of the Cambrian period, which is a geological period that goes back over 500 million years. So that was the oldest footprint evidence that I documented in Forbidden Archaeology. In terms of human skeletal remains, the oldest human skeletal remains came from a report that was published in a scientific journal called The Geologist in the year 1862. A fairly complete human skeleton was found 90 feet below the surface of the ground in Macoupin County in the state of Illinois in America. And according to the report, above the skeleton was a thick layer of slate rock which was unbroken. And that's an important detail because the usual counter explanation for these kinds of discoveries is that somehow or other some skeleton from some higher level slipped down through a crack or something and got into some very ancient layer of rock. According to modern geologists, the age of the formation below the slate rock at that location is about 300 million years. So there we have a human skeleton about 300 million years old. I don't think that's the oldest human skeleton, but that's the oldest one that's recorded in the scientific literature. And in terms of human artifacts, there were some interesting discoveries made in South Africa of round metallic spheres.
Oh, yeah.
I call them metallic because they were analyzed and they were made from hematite, which is a naturally occurring type of iron. It's considered to be a semi-precious stone, actually. And the most interesting feature of these round objects was the fact that around their equators, around the center of each object, were parallel grooves that had been engraved into these objects. Some of them would have 2 grooves, some 3, some 4. And these objects were found in mineral deposits over 2 billion years old. So those are the oldest discoveries that I was able to document in forbidden archaeology in the 3 categories: footprints or shoe prints, artifacts, and human skeletal remains.
Wow, fascinating. And of course, we had the Litoli footprints from Tanzania again. Tell us what was anomalous about them, Michael.
Well, most scientists now believe that anatomically modern humans, human beings like us, first came into existence less than 200,000 years ago. So in 1979, Mary Leakey, who was a very prominent archaeologist, announced the discovery of footprints at a place called Litoli in the country of Tanzania in East Africa. And in her original report, published in National Geographic magazine, Mary Leakey stated that these footprints were indistinguishable from modern human footprints. In other words, they were just like footprints that you or I would make if we were walking on a beach today. So these footprints were discovered in layers of solidified volcanic ash that were dated with the potassium-argon method and yielded an age of 3,700,000 years. So it's really quite astonishing that you've got footprints indistinguishable from anatomically modern human footprints in layers of rock almost 4 million years old. Now, Mary Leakey didn't believe that humans like us made those footprints. She was a supporter of the Darwinian theory of human evolution. She didn't believe that humans like us existed almost 4 million years ago. So she had to explain the footprints in some way. So she proposed they must have belonged to some kind of ape man who just happened to have feet, just like modern human feet. Now, that's an interesting idea, but there isn't any physical evidence to support it. And we have the skeletons of the ape men that existed between 3 and 4 million years ago. They're called Australopithecus, and foot bones of Australopithecus have been discovered at a place called Sterkfontein in South Africa. And the foot structure of Australopithecus is not like that of a modern human being. It's like that of a chimpanzee. with very long toes, sort of like human fingers, and a first toe that can move out to the side like a human thumb. So the foot is very ape-like, not human at all. So actually, according to the actual scientific evidence, the only creature we know of from skeletal evidence that has a foot exactly like a modern human foot is a human being like ourselves. So what did Mary Leakey actually find at Laetoli? I think she found evidence that humans like us were existing 4 million years ago. And it's interesting, just last year, some footprints were discovered at a place called Happisburgh in the United Kingdom. It's on the east coast of England. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the footprints there were not as old as the ones at Laetoli. They were about 900,000 years old, but they were, according to the scientists who examined them, very much like modern human footprints. They did some detailed measurements. There's a particular measurement called the foot index, where you take the width of the foot and you divide it by the length of the foot and multiply by 100. And it turned out that the foot index of these dozens of footprints that were found at Happisburgh on the coast of England and are about 900,000 years old are just like the foot index of living humans today. So, of course, the scientists who discovered these things didn't believe that humans like us existed 900,000 years ago. The current dominant idea is that humans like us came into existence less than 200,000 years ago. So they did a similar thing, a thing similar to what Mary Leakey did. They attributed the Happisburgh footprints to some kind of ape man who lived in Europe 900,000 years ago, called Homo antecessor. The remains of this creature have been discovered at a site called Grandolina in Spain. So it's part of what I call the process of knowledge filtration. Somehow or other, scientists try to make things fit. Rather than changing their current theories to match the evidence, they change the evidence to match their currently accepted theories.
I think that's what you expose time and time again, Michael, is that the Darwinian paradigm is an idea. It's a theory, with very little to back it up today. I don't think there's anything to really back it up, and it's a camp, as you say. It's the Church of Darwin, as some people label the people that follow it, because it is like a church in a way, and there's like hardcore followers of Darwin, evolutionary biologists to name a few, and not to speak disparagingly of people who follow these as careers, but just to make the point that it is also, it's almost like religious what happens with Darwinian theory. I guess one of the things that is incompatible with the Darwinian paradigm is the bola stones in Argentina from the Olduvai Gorge, I think.
Well, the Olduvai Gorge is in Africa, but there were bola stones discovered in Argentina at a place called Miramar, which is on the coast of Argentina, just a little south of Buenos Aires. These were discoveries that were made early in the 20th century by an Argentine scientist named Carlos Ameghino. Actually, the first thing he discovered at the Miramar site that caused a lot of controversy was the bone of an extinct South American mammal called a toxodon that had embedded in it a flint arrowhead. And this fossil animal bone with a flint arrowhead embedded in it was found in a geological formation about 3 million years old. So this is anomalous for a few reasons. First of all, archaeologists consider a weapon like an arrow to be something that only someone with modern human intelligence would be able to make and use. They don't think any of the ape men had that capability. And so to have that kind of evidence at 3 million years is really quite astonishing. And to have it in South America is equally astonishing. Their current idea is that there were no humans in North or South America any earlier than about 20 or 25,000 years ago. So to have evidence for a human presence in South America at 3 million years is quite astonishing. Wow. So many scientists of the time, this was the early 20th century, around 1915 when this discovery was announced, many scientists of the time were very skeptical about the discovery because it contradicted the Darwinian human evolutionary expectations. So, excuse me, they tried to explain the discovery away. Some of them proposed, well, somebody must have taken this fossil animal bone, toxodon bone, and they must have gotten from some recent Indian village a stone arrowhead, and they must have pounded the stone arrowhead into the fossil, and they must have planted the fossil for Carlos Ameghino to find in his excavations. So, after being accused of being the victim of a hoax, Carlos Ameghino summoned a committee of leading South American scientists, archaeologists, paleontologists, and geologists to come to the Miramar site. And there they conducted new excavations under conditions that completely ruled out the possibility of any kind of hoax of the kind that had been alleged. So with all of these scientists present and conducting the excavations themselves, they uncovered several bola stones. So bola stones are pieces of stone that have been carved into a sphere-like shape, a round shape like a ball, and they have a groove around the center, which is used to attach a cord made of leather or plant fiber. And to use this weapon, they spin it around and then throw it, and then it'll wrap the balls of stone, the bola stones, and the cord will wrap themselves around the feet of a large bird or small animal, something like that. So again, archaeologists consider this bola stone to be the kind of weapon that would be made and used only by someone with anatomically modern human capabilities. So these bola stones were found in the same formations as the toxodon bone with a flint arrowhead embedded in it, about 3 million years old. It's quite an interesting discovery.
Wow, fascinating, Michael. Of course, you have a book as well, Forbidden Archaeology's Impact as a Result of Forbidden Archaeology. In a scientific sense, you must, professional sense, Michael, you must have a lot of arrows in the back. You must be hated by some of these professional, dogmatic people that, really are clinging on to stale ideas. Michael, I guess, tell us a little bit of Forbidden Archaeology's Impact.
Well, after people read my book, Forbidden Archaeology, they began to ask me, well, what has been the reaction of scientists to your work? What has been the impact of it? So to answer that question, I put together this book, Forbidden Archaeology's Impact, which included all the reactions that scientists had given up to the time that the book was published, all the reactions that scientists had given to the book Forbidden Archaeology. Now, there were basically three kinds of reactions, because basically I see there are three types of scientists out there. One group I call the fundamentalist Darwinist, or the fundamentalist materialist. Mm-hmm. They're very much attached to the current Darwinian theories of human origins and antiquity, not so much for purely scientific reasons, but because those ideas support their prior belief in atheism or materialism. And they're very much politically motivated, and as a group, they tend to not like what I do very much. They don't want to hear anything about it, and they don't want anyone else to hear about it. And sometimes their dismissals of my work are put in very crude, abusive kinds of language. For example, Richard Leakey said, your book is pure humbug. Nobody would take it seriously but a fool. Another scientist, Jonathan Marks, said, it's Hinduoid creationist dribble, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And actually, I've used these very abusive, negative sorts of statements to get actually more publicity for my work. So they've helped me sell a lot of books. So that's one group of scientists. They don't want to hear what I have to say. They don't want anyone else to hear what I have to say. Now, sometimes, I'm scheduled to give a lecture at a university by professors who want to hear what I have to say. And these other kinds of scientists, the members of this fundamentalist Darwinist group, will approach the administration of the university and try to get them to cancel the lecture. It's another feature of what I call the process of knowledge filtration. Sure. So that's one group. They're very influential in the world of science. Yeah. There's another group who may accept the current theories, but they accept the current theories for what they regard as genuinely scientific reasons. It's not an ideology for them or a religion, as you were putting it. And they're willing to listen to alternatives. And scientists in this group, although they may not necessarily agree with me, have stated in their reviews of Forbidden Archaeology that they find some valuable aspects to the research. As I said, they may not initially accept all the conclusions, but they can see some value in it, even for a mainstream scientist. For example, there was a review published in British Journal for History of Science by archaeologist Tim Murray. And, he said, well, the book provides an excellent collection of case studies for those interested in the history and philosophy of science, and which would be very useful for encouraging debate about the epistemology of the discipline of archaeology. And to put that in more simple terms, epistemology is the branch of philosophy that tells us how we know something, how we evaluate evidence, what is good evidence, what is bad evidence. So actually that was one of my purposes in publishing the book Forbidden Archaeology and drawing it to the attention of professional archaeologists. It was to get them to start thinking and discussing and debating the epistemology of their discipline. What counts as evidence? Is evidence being unfairly dismissed? It's the scientists in this group who may be supporters of the current theories but are open-minded enough to be willing to listen to an alternative, who have had some positive things to say about my Forbidden Archaeology work, and they have also been kind enough to invite me to make presentations about my work at international scientific conferences and universities and scientific institutions.
How big is that group, Michael, percentage-wise? Is that a big percentage?
I would say it's equal in number to the fundamentalist materialist group. But that fundamentalist materialist group can be very loud.
For sure. Michael, let's go at the, I don't want to be Darwin bashing. I really don't. I just want to talk in a philosophical and intellectual sense. But these guys are saying we come from ape-like creatures. Where do we fit into that? I mean, we're saying that, no, we've been here since the start of, what they're telling us we should have been apes, and then we evolved into modern anatomically humans, and, there was an evolution. But what we're saying is, no, right at the start we were, modernly, what we would call a modern anatomical human. We had intelligence right from the very start, or at least deep antiquity. Where does all the other human strains fit into this, particularly, for example, the Neanderthals? Because it's now looking like the Neanderthals are incredibly intelligent people and not the dummies they were made out. They were musical, expressionistic, artistic, and these guys were pretty clever too.
Well, I don't deny the existence of various kinds of ape men. Australopithecus existed, Homo erectus existed, the Neanderthals existed. My point would be is that if you look at all of the archaeological evidence, you'll see that alongside the ancient apes and monkeys, and alongside the various kinds of ancient ape men, humans like us were also existing, so that the picture that emerges, if you look at the complete set of evidence, is one of coexistence rather than evolution. Now, if you filter out all the evidence for extreme human antiquity, then the pattern of evidence looks like it supports the idea that we evolved from apes and monkeys. But that only happens if you leave out of the picture all of the evidence for extreme human antiquity, all of the discoveries of anatomically modern human bones, footprints, and artifacts of the kind that would be made by someone with modern human intelligence. If you leave that evidence out of the picture, then the evidence does appear to support an evolutionary picture of human origins. But the real thing, if you include all the evidence in the picture, is one of coexistence. Now, among the different types of ape men, some are very, very close to what we might call the anatomically modern human level in terms of both their physiology and their cultural achievements. And I'll have to confess that since the time I wrote Forbidden Archaeology, my understanding of what anatomically modern human actually means has changed a little bit. For example, the Neanderthals are very close to modern humans in terms of their skeletal structure. Mm-hmm. But, they have some differences. For example, most of the Neanderthal skulls would have very pronounced brow ridges above their eye sockets. In other words, they would have these ridges of bone, these bony ridges, circular ridges above their eyes. When I'm talking about brow ridges, I'm not talking about, the hair, above the eye. I'm talking about a bony ridge that projects out. So that's a characteristic feature of the Neanderthal skulls, but the fact is there are, among living humans today, people who have that same feature. So on that basis, I'm prepared to expand my definition of what it means to be an anatomically modern human, because if you say modern, well, there are humans today who have skulls with features that some archaeologists would characterize as Neanderthaloid. So I would say, we may have to include the Neanderthals in our definition of anatomically modern humans. Now, there are some of the ancient ape men who are so different in terms of their physiology and level of culture from anatomically modern humans that I think they do remain distinct, from the definition. But I think the Neanderthals are an example of a type of ape man that's so close to the modern human type that it doesn't make perhaps too much sense to try to distinguish them from Homo sapiens.
Sure.
You might call them a subspecies, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis.
Sure. In a way, my line of thinking then, Michael, is, let's say you have this ape-like evolutionary tree that the evolutionary people call, and we have, from your work saying, no, we have our own separate tree and it's just the humans on it, and we going back, coexisting to deep antiquity alongside the other ape-like tree. And I'm saying maybe that the Neanderthals are not on that tree either, that they're also coexisting right back to deep antiquity. And perhaps if
that could be true. I think that's a viable way to look at things.
And perhaps, where does it end? I mean, perhaps we're all on our own evolutionary tree, and that's what leads me to...
Well, ultimately, I think something like that is true, not just for human beings, but for other forms of life as well.
And that kind of leads me into the next question is about intelligent design versus Darwinism. Maybe we could define what intelligent design is, and maybe define creationism, because I believe it's not the same thing. There's quite a distinct difference.
Well, sometimes it depends who's defining things. For many in the scientific world who oppose bringing in intelligent design, they want to say it's the same thing as creationism. Most of the scientists who are involved in the intelligent design movement will try to distinguish themselves from creationism because they look at creationism as something pretty strictly religious, where you're proposing God created living things in the beginning in a way described in a particular religious text, the Bible, for example. Mm-hmm. And they would say, well, that's not what we're about. We're into just looking at the evidence for design. Like in in Europe, for example, the European Union has some laws against the importing of genetically modified foods.
Sure.
So they have scientists who will do analyses of samples of foods that are being proposed for import into the European Union, and they'll study them. They'll look at the DNA and see if they can detect any signs for the artificial manipulation of the DNA. In other words, for genetically modified DNA. And if they detect that, well, then they won't allow that food to be imported. So that means scientists are trained to detect design.
Wow.
So the intelligent design theorists say there's something like that. They're just looking for patterns that suggest something didn't arise by random natural processes, that some kind of intelligent being had to be involved in the origin of the level of complexity that we are confronted with. And who the designer was, they're not going to say. That's not part of their work as intelligent design theorists.
Like a political
that is how they would try to distinguish themselves from what's called creationism, which many regard as a more purely religious idea. Of course, their opponents will try to say, yeah, you're pretending to be purely scientific, but we know that behind that is some belief in God. And, so it gets to be a complicated debate.
Terms. Yeah.
But one thing I'd like to point out is I read an interesting book recently. It's called Mind and Cosmos by the philosopher Thomas Nagel, who happens to be an atheist. But the subtitle of the book, Mind and Cosmos, is Why the Neo-Darwinian Materialist View of Nature is Most Probably Wrong. And in this book, this atheistic philosopher, a very prominent one, a professor at a big university in the United States, says that as far as he can see, the supporters of Darwinism have given no viable explanation for the origin of the first living thing. They propose it came from chemicals, that chemicals randomly interacting with each other during the early history of the Earth somehow produced some first self-reproducing biological single-celled organism. But they've never demonstrated that. A second problem he identified with Darwinism is that they really haven't explained the origin of complex features in organisms according to the methods that their theory demands. In other words, they should be able to specify exactly what mutations took place in an evolving line of creatures over many millions of years that led to the production of the human eye. Of course, they have all kinds of proposals how it took place, but they haven't scientifically spelled it out on the level of specifying the exact genetic changes that would have had to take place to bring about the kinds of changes in the organisms that they're proposing happened. You know, they say it happened by evolution, but they can't explain exactly how it took place. So that's the second problem, he said, with Darwinism. Third problem, and I agree with this, is that they have not explained the origin of consciousness. They assert it's produced by chemicals interacting in the brain, but nobody has ever specified exactly which chemicals produce consciousness. So it's kind of interesting that even atheists and materialists like Thomas Nagel are having big problems with Darwinism. And they're saying it just doesn't work.
Sure.
Even So it's not just that the intelligent design theorist and the creationist are having problems with Darwinism. Even objective atheists are having problems with it as well.
Didn't Dawkins on a documentary, what a moment, he was asked where did the first self-replicating self come from, and he was stuck. It was almost cringeworthy, his explanation, which was kind of ludicrous. It was like, well, not ludicrous, but ludicrous in that was his answer, that he just didn't have anything,
Yeah, I think sometimes, his proposals are really quite interesting. For example, he said, well, what are we, in one of his books? And to answer the question, he said, well, we're survival machines, we're robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. It's a very dark, materialistic picture of what we are. And I think it's ideas like that have led to or contributed to a lot of the problems that we see in the world today. Because if you define your existence in an extremely materialistic way, it's likely that your goals and values are going to become extremely materialistic. And I think this is one of the underlying causes of the world's environmental crisis. We're simply producing and consuming at a rate that's not sustainable. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason for that is because we've defined our existence in terms of purely materialistic needs. And not only has Dawkins defined our existence in a purely material way by saying we're just machines made of molecules, he's proposing we're machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival. And to me, that is one of the contributing causes to the intense levels of conflict and violence that we see in the world around us. I think the way out of this is to come up with a new scientific and philosophical definition of the self. And in my book, Human Devolution, a Vedic Alternative to Darwin's Theory, I tried to suggest what an alternative could be, namely that as conscious beings, we do not evolve up from matter, rather we devolve or come down from some higher level of reality that I call the level of pure consciousness. Most scientists today believe that consciousness is produced by matter. I don't believe that consciousness is produced by matter. I believe consciousness has its own independent existence apart from matter. But it can come into contact with matter, and when it does, it becomes limited. So the main purpose of human life, according to that understanding, would be to restore consciousness to its original pure state beyond the limitations of matter.
Well, that kind of touches on my next question and kind of let me expand it a little bit. I think a lot of people that think about intelligent design is thinking that there is a consciousness out there or an intelligence that is genetically manipulating us in a physical, material sense to make humans or to make Neanderthals or whatever we were talking about. But perhaps this consciousness is manifesting in organisms. Is that a better way to look at it, Michael?
Well, one thing doesn't rule out the other. I think there is a conscious self in each organism. Mm-hmm. And I think there is an overall guiding intelligence, conscious intelligence, that is the ultimate source of matter and the different forms that matter can take. And I think our bodies are vehicles made of matter that allow a conscious self to function on this level of reality. For example, as human beings, we normally live on the land. If we want to live in an alien element like water, we need some vehicle that will allow us to function in the water. We need a diving suit or a submarine. And where do those vehicles come from? They come from a designer who understands that if a human being is going to survive and act under the water, it needs such a vehicle. So similarly, as conscious beings, we're normally meant to exist on the level of pure consciousness. If we come to the alien world of matter, then we need vehicles that will allow us to function on this level of reality. And there are many kinds of vehicles. There are plant vehicles, there are animal vehicles, there are human vehicles. Where do these vehicles come from? I believe they come from a conscious, intelligent being who understands that if conscious selves are going to function in the world of matter, they need vehicles that will allow them to do that. So this conscious intelligence designs and constructs such vehicles. But once the first ones are manifested, they go on to reproduce themselves. At least that's how I see it. So I think the consciousness can be there in each individual vehicle, and that consciousness can also be outside in terms of an overall guiding intelligence. So I don't think the two things are necessarily contradictory. I think they're complementary.
Sure. Of course, in the sense of the Anunnaki and genetic manipulation of mankind and the theories surrounding all of that, obviously Sitchin's work and many others now, do you think this fits in with the Vedic scriptures? Is it too specific and kind of a manifestation of our own, seeking of evidence, or do you think perhaps this fits in nicely or gels nicely?
Well, I'll say two things about that. First, I'll say what I agree with, and that is the idea of extraterrestrial intelligence having something to do with the biological forms that we see on this planet, on this level of reality. So I may have an expanded conception of what extraterrestrial means. For some people, extraterrestrial means some other biological entity very much like ourselves, a flesh and blood creature from some other material planet in the material universe that has somehow or other manipulated the process of the formation of bodies of organisms on this planet. I don't confine my understanding of extraterrestrial to that. For me, extraterrestrial may also include higher beings, who operate on a finer, more subtle level of reality than ourselves. And, in different cultures, people may have different names for these kinds of beings. They may call them devas or jinn or angels or astral beings or extra-dimensional beings, things like that. So I have an expanded concept of what it means to be an extraterrestrial, but I do think that extraterrestrial intelligence does have something to do with our origins. Most of the theorists of the kind that you've been talking about would propose that, and here I'm going to talk about where I disagree, would propose that the evolutionary process went on Earth pretty much as its supporters among the Darwinists say, up to the point of the ape-man Homo erectus, who existed around 300,000 or 400,000 years ago. They would say at that point, some flesh and blood extraterrestrials manipulated the genes of that ape man and turned it into anatomically modern humans as kind of a slave race to be used for whatever purposes they had in mind. Now, that's where I might have some differences. First of all, I think the archaeological evidence shows that anatomically modern humans have been present on this planet for far longer than 300,000 or 400,000 years, and so I would have some differences, but on the general principle that some kind of extraterrestrial intelligence has been involved in designing and producing the bodily vehicles of conscious selves on this level of reality. That general idea I would agree with.
Sure. Of course, I want to save some time for the last half of the show, Michael, to get into some of the scriptures, the Vedic scriptures. This is what I find fascinating more so, and I'm in the process of reading some of the Upanishads at the moment, and it's a translated version, obviously, and condensed, but these Vedic scriptures, Michael, for me, are really, really gelling with some of this work that you've done with the forbidden archaeology. For example, the Hindu cosmology, that there is deep antiquities of time. I know that was probably the driving force to seek that evidence. I think we spoke about that on the show before, that you said if there was evidence out there to support that, it must be in the record. And I think you've done that. So maybe you could talk about some of the Hindu cosmology and the deep antiquity of these cycles.
Well, the Vedic concept of time is cyclical, and this is true of many ancient wisdom traditions. The Mayan culture of Central America had a cyclical concept of time. The ancient Greeks and Romans had a cyclical concept of time, and even most people today are aware of time cycles. For example, we're aware of the day-night cycle. And, during the day we act in a certain way, at night we act in a certain way. We're also aware of the seasonal cycle in the temperate parts of the world. There's spring, summer, winter, fall, and we're aware of the passing of those seasons and that they recur, and we dress and adjust our activities differently according to the different seasons. But many of the people in the ancient world had knowledge of far larger cycles of time. The basic unit of Vedic cosmological time is called the kalpa, or the day of Brahma. It lasts for 4,320,000,000 years. It's followed by a night of Brahma, which also lasts for 4,320,000,000 years. And then there's another day, another night. The cycle goes on practically endlessly. And during the days of Brahma, life, including human life, is manifest in the universe. And during the nights, it's not manifest. It's dormant. So that is the basic unit of Vedic cyclical time. According to a more detailed understanding, the kalpa is divided into sub-cycles called manvantars, each one of which lasts roughly 300 million years. So there are 14 manvantars in a kalpa, or day of Brahma. According to the Vedic cosmological calendar, we're now in the 7th manvantar. In other words, we're just past halfway through the kalpa. We've gone through 6 manvantars. We're now in the 7th, and there's another 7 to go until the kalpa ends. And there's an interesting detail, namely that at the end of each manvantar, there is a devastation that takes place that wipes out life on Earth, and the Earth has to be repopulated. Now, if we look at what this means in terms of years, we're now about halfway through a day of Brahma, or a kalpa. That means it began roughly 2 billion years ago. And that's roughly when modern science says life began on Earth. That's the age of the oldest undisputed evidence for cellular life on Earth. Yes, some scientists say they can detect chemical signs of organic chemicals earlier than that, but the oldest undisputed fossil evidence is roughly about 2 billion years old. Now, since that time, there have been 6 of these cosmic devastations, according to the Vedic cosmology. According to modern paleontology, in the history of life on Earth, since about 2 billion years ago, there have been 6 major extinction events, spaced at intervals of several hundred million years. The last of these extinction events was the one that wiped out the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. So I see some interesting parallels between the Vedic cyclical time concept and some of the discoveries of modern science. And, it's interesting that, the Vedic timescales of hundreds of millions and billions of years fit in with modern cosmology, whereas, some of the timescales that come out of some religious traditions don't fit very well with those vast periods of time. In other words, some people would be talking about everything fitting within 10,000 years or so, which I think they have a right to propose, but I favor another idea. So there are some interesting features of this Vedic cyclical concept of time that sort of match up with the discoveries of modern geologists and paleontologists. And it's interesting for me to contemplate the process for restoring life on this planet after these devastations that take place after each Manvantar. To me, it's sort of like cloud computing. Many people are beginning to use what they call the cloud in their computing. In other words, they store all of their programs and files and songs and pictures,
myself included,
not
Michael,
on their own device, but on the cloud, so to speak. So that if their device, their smartphone or computer gets destroyed, well, they still have access to all their files. If they get a new device, they could restore everything, restore all the files, restore all the programs. So I think something like that operates on a cosmic scale, that when there is a devastation that wipes out life on this earth, which periodically happens, the resources necessary to restore life are there at higher levels of the cosmos.
Wow, fascinating, Michael. Of course, Michael, what I love and what attracts me to the Vedic scriptures is that it talks about science. It talks about, I think we talked on one of the last shows about ancient nuclear blasts and perhaps Brahma weapons, and I'm going to get into some of this in a minute, but it also talks about the energies of the body. I think it's pranic energies and the different types of energies that the bodies have, and some sort of a surgical or medical knowledge and body rhythms and stuff like that, and medicine and surgery. This is like that the Vedic scriptures is a deeply philosophical blueprint for what we are and who we are and what we're about and what we should maybe, try and do with our lives. Would that be a great way to say it? Yes,
and that's essentially why I was attracted to them. Of course, I think you can find the same thing in other traditions, but those are judgments each person is going to have to make. For example, if you want to get a smartphone, there's so many different types of smartphones you could get, and each individual is going to have to decide what works best for them. And looking at all the systems of philosophy and spirituality that I came in contact with, I decided, well, I wanted to follow at least one of them. So, I picked one, the one that seemed to work best for me, and it happened to come from among the Vedic group of paths. So, I think you're right. The Vedic literature contains a lot. It contains philosophy, it contains theology, it contains cosmology, it contains science, it contains personal development, meditation, yoga, understanding of esoteric concepts like reincarnation and things of that sort. It's all kind of blended together. And in Western educational systems, we tend to separate everything into its own individual topic. Biology is different from geology, is different from this, is different from that. And the Vedic system of thought, all of these things seem to be very closely integrated, with one depending on the other. So you get a blend of theology and cosmology and philosophy and science and self-improvement. So, to me, that's very satisfying. I think to many other people it is also.
Sure. I hear talk of Mohenjo-Daro perhaps having radiation levels that are really high, and that it may be a physical representation of a nuclear fallout in ancient times. Do we have any truth to that, Michael?
Well, I've, of course, heard that many times, and I've seen many reports circulating on the web about that, but they're very short reports, and they may mention some names, and when I've tried to follow them out, I haven't been able to trace down the detailed, scientific reports that would give the complete set of evidence for these claims. Not saying that it doesn't exist, but up to the present moment, I haven't been able to track it down. Maybe you have, or maybe one of your listeners has, and in that case, I'd be very happy to hear from them about it. But as far as my understanding goes, yes, in the Vedic literature, we do find descriptions of weapons resembling modern nuclear weapons. Not exactly like modern nuclear weapons. To make a modern nuclear weapon, you have to dig up uranium, or you have to refine it with a very complex procedure. And then once you've extracted, some concentrated uranium isotopes or plutonium, there's a very complex material process of putting it into a weaponized form, and it's done mechanically, and the weapons in Vedic times were manifested and controlled by mantra, by sound vibration. So the most powerful weapon that could be manifested was called a Brahmastra. And that weapon, when it was used, the descriptions say it was like, if you had thousands of suns all together in one place. And it does sort of match up with the effects of a nuclear blast, but I don't think it's exactly the same. In other words, there was a different technology involved in the production of these Brahmastra weapons, a more subtle kind of technology. Of course, we are learning today in science that sound has incredible power. Like we're using sound, supersonic sound these days for purifying medical instruments, and sound can be used for welding, for very detailed welding of metals that are normally hard to put together. So even scientists today are learning how to manipulate sound in some very unusual ways, but apparently the practitioners in Vedic times had an even deeper and more fundamental understanding of sound vibration and could use it to do some pretty amazing things, such as manifest these Brahmastra weapons, the effects of which rivaled those of modern nuclear weapons. It's interesting that some of the scientists involved in doing the original research for the nuclear bomb that was produced by the United States in 1945 during World War II were aware of the ancient Sanskrit descriptions of Brahmastras.
Sure. I actually have a clip. I don't normally play clips on the show, but I'm going to just play it's a 1 minute clip, Michael, of Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. He talks about the destroyer of worlds. Just 1 second. It's going 1 minute clip, Michael.
Yeah, let's put that up. That's exactly who I was referring to.
Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. They remembered the line from the Hindu scripture of the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him, takes on this human form and says, "Now you become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
Yes.
I think the most.
Yeah, Robert Oppenheimer, in addition to being a great physicist, was a student of the Sanskrit language, and he had studied the Vedic text. I think in another reference, he made a reference to the effect being like thousands of suns gathered together in one place, which is another reference from the Bhagavad Gita, the same text he was citing. What he was recalling in that excerpt that you played was what it was like to be present in the bunker when the first atomic bomb was tested at Alamogordo in New Mexico in 1945. There was this huge flash of light. So when that happened, he was recalling these texts from the Bhagavad Gita.
Of course, and because the listeners wouldn't have seen that, but he was deeply emotional, Michael. He had a tear in his eye, and he could just, I think he realized what mankind has just done, that they're reenacting something from ancient times, that they're reenacting something that is a destroyer of worlds. I don't think he was very happy, Michael, when he seen the atomic bomb going off for the first time. I think he was deeply sad for humanity that we have this ability to wipe ourselves out.
Yes, that's true. We also have the ability, according to the Vedic text, to become completely free from this level of reality where there is such a thing as birth and death, because the conscious self, according to the Bhagavad Gita is deathless. It has no beginning. It has no end. And by proper use of consciousness, it's possible to bring consciousness to that level where it no longer has to take birth on this level of reality, where we do experience birth and death individually and collectively.
Of course, there's a lot of specific scientific concepts embodied in the Vedic scriptures. They talk about Earth being a sphere. Is this true, Michael? Do we have an accurate description of the Earth being a sphere in the Vedic scriptures?
Well, there are complementary descriptions of the Earth as a globe, as a circular plane. For example, we can represent the reality of the Earth in different ways. One way we represent the Earth is by having a globe. So you might have on your desk a globe, which depicts the Earth in a spherical way. And we may also have on our desk an atlas, a map, in which the Earth is depicted in a flat way. So they're actually complementary descriptions. The Earth as it's mapped is a projection of the spherical Earth, and you can go from one to the other. If you know the mathematics involved in the projection, you can go from one to the other. So sometimes in the Vedic scriptures, we see things described in one way and then in another way, but they're complementary. Some of us say, like I had a friend once who was a computer programmer, and he knew machine language and all of that. And, he could make his own computer graphics just by, typing out code. And for example, if I said, make a red ball spinning, he could type out some code, and then on the screen would appear a red ball spinning around. So the red ball spinning around is actually the same as the code that he wrote, which could be reduced to machine language, a series of zeros and ones. And it would, if you could look into the computer chip in the computer, which has circuits, microcircuits on it with gates, plus and minus gates, positive and negative gates.
Sure.
You could actually see a pattern in the computer chip. And they're actually all the same. The red ball spinning on the screen, the computer code, the machine language code, and the actual physical state of the computer chip, the state of the circuitry in the computer chip. They're all the same. And if you were sufficiently intelligent, you could understand just from the state of the computer chip that what's being depicted on the screen is a red ball spinning. Or if you knew machine language, you could look at the patterns of zeros and ones, and you could perhaps determine that that pattern of zeros and ones represents a red ball spinning. And vice versa. If you're sufficiently knowledgeable and practiced, you could see how all those things are equivalent. So what we get in the Vedic literature is complementary descriptions of cosmological phenomena that are related to each other if you understand the principles lying behind them. So sometimes the Earth is described in Vedic texts called the Jyotish Shastras, the astronomical texts, as spherical, and in other parts of the Vedic text it's described in another way, because ultimately the Vedic universe is consciousness based. It's sort of more like say computer games. There's a lot of effort by computer companies and programmers to develop computer games, and what basically they do is they provide an environment in which a user gets a particular experience. And you can give all kinds of experiences. You can have Grand Theft Auto, you can have Call of Duty, you can have all different types of situations that a user is put into and can interact with the computer reality in certain ways. So it's basically meant to give a user a conscious experience. So the Vedic universe is something like that. It's designed by higher intelligence to give conscious selves different types of environments in which they get different types of conscious experiences. It's more like a virtual reality system than, just a bunch of rocks and, globes of rock and gas floating around in a void. It's not exactly like that. That's an aspect of it, but more to the point, it's a virtual reality system designed to give us different experiences in different locations.
I think it's, forgive my pronunciation, but the Markandeya Purana states the phases of the moon, the cause of twilight, and the reason why the sky is blue, which is the scientific principle of scattering of light, which I'm familiar with, and it's the scattering of light is why we have blue skies and why it filters out different colours. This seems to be describing again scientific physical principles, Michael.
Yes, it does. And actually I'm involved in a project now. It's called Temple of Vedic Planetarium, which is going to be erected in India by the group that I'm part of. It's called the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And in this Vedic planetarium, we're going to be explaining the astronomical knowledge that the Vedic texts include. They include explanations of eclipses and the seasons and all of the and the point that you mentioned from the Markandeya Purana, that's also interesting. Perhaps we'll include that also. It's a long-range project. The structure of it is being constructed at the present time, but when the structure is completed in a few years, then the museum exhibits and planetarium exhibits are going to be developed, and I'm going to have some advisory role in that. So yes, you're right. There are Vedic texts that give information about what we might call observational astronomy. Mm-hmm. They give information about how to calculate time by the movement of atoms, for example, and things of that sort. So all of that will be included in this project. So, but then there are things that go beyond visible astronomy, things that are beyond the present range of our senses. And that's another aspect of the Vedic cosmos, that the Vedic literature give information not only about what we can observe with our present senses, but they also give information about things that we can't observe with our present senses.
Wow. Of course, Michael, we're talking about this scientific stuff, the Earth and the scattering of light and the Brahmastra and the nuclear knowledge. This kind of hints, to me, that, we were given this knowledge from a higher consciousness or an intelligence. I don't think it's a body of knowledge that has survived an historical account. I think how could you know about such deep epochs? Personally, I think, maybe it's encoded in the Sanskrit writings from a higher sense. Would that be fair to say? Are these historical?
Well, that is a way to look at it, but I think you hit on it, that it's knowledge that has been passed down from a higher source, from people who are at a level of consciousness where they're aware of these things. Mm-hmm. Like you were describing the Markandeya Purana. Mm-hmm. So Markandeya was a Vedic sage who existed a long time ago and who has the ability to live longer than a normal human being. Like our lifespan goes for maybe a maximum of 100 years. This sage Markandeya is from some higher level of reality, and he could live throughout an entire day of Brahma, a kalpa, lasting billions of years. So he has a different perspective on the universe than we do. He has a higher source of knowledge, and the Purana, or history, that bears his name contains what was revealed by him. So I think you're right that there is a higher source of knowledge, and that there's a transmission of this knowledge down through history, and it's accessible to us if we're willing to accept it. And if we carefully look at it, we'll see that it gives us some ways to verify it by observational astronomy as well.
I think some of the gods and goddesses are the figures of the Sanskrit writings, Michael. I think some of them are described as being blue beings, or having a blue skin. Is that any links to the blue gods that we see depicted in Egyptian drawings?
There can be some connection cross-culturally between these things. Of course, these beings are composed of a higher energy. Mm-hmm. They're not flesh and blood creatures like ourselves. They're manifested from a higher source of energy, a more subtle form of energy. So our descriptions of their colors and things like that are probably like our attempts to translate into things, sure, into terms we can understand. Sometimes, I think, for example, if you look at really high quality, computer graphics, high definition, the colors are just out of this world. Yeah, you might say, and you're just dazzled by them. I think the actual colors of the forms of these higher beings are something like that, something from another dimension, something way beyond the pale, dull colors of our current level of perception. But if we were going to try to describe them in terms of the colors that we normally perceive, then blue might fit.
For sure. And I welcome anybody you'll get this online, and you can look up the ancient Hindu texts of the Mahabharata. You will see them talking about Vimanas, these aircraft. We talked about that in the last show. They're throwing projectiles with the power of the universe, smoke and flame, people being reduced to ashes, their nails and their hair falling out, hinting at radiation or something like that. And I think you hit on it, Michael. It's not necessarily the exact same as a nuclear bomb, or it's like some type of similar ancient nuclear energy, or some sort of these weapons are very, very similar to a nuclear device.
Sure.
Again, but when you read these passages, Michael, it's incredibly, you couldn't encode this knowledge unless you had the knowledge.
Yeah, one thing I found fascinating, there's one Vedic text called the Srimad Bhagavatam, which I find really fascinating. And it contains a description of a Vimana, or spacecraft, that was used to attack a city on Earth. It was actually the city of Dwarka, where Krishna was ruling as king. Mm-hmm. And this Vimana apparently projected 3D holographic forms, that are just amazing, because what happened was Lord Krishna, who was the ruler of the city, was being attacked. And the enemy king, Shalva, who was piloting this huge vimana that was raining down weapons on the city, came down from his craft that was hovering above the city, and he told Krishna, "I've got your father and I'm going to kill him." And he cut off his head right there. I mean, we've been hearing things in the news about stuff like this, but it's been going on for a long time. But, and then this King Shalva went back up into his craft. He was beamed back up into it. But Krishna noticed that the body, the headless body, allegedly of his father, just disappeared. So he could understand it was a holographic projection, an illusion that had been projected by Shalva, making use of the capabilities of this craft. Now, holographic projections of human bodies is something that's coming into vogue these days. You know, sometimes at rock concerts you'll see this employed, where you get projected on a stage the form of a singer who may be somewhere else or who's dead, and it's like they're performing live with a 3D form. So, but that technology was also present long, long ago, according to these ancient texts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned the Dwarka city. I had Amish Shah and Jason Martell on the show. They're doing
Amish Shah, right.
Yeah, they're doing a Dwarka documentary which you're involved in. Is that correct?
Yes, Amish Shah did produce a documentary, and he interviewed me for it. I think it's out there. I don't have the link for it right now, or
I can put it.
I don't know exactly how it's available, but yes, I was part of that documentary.
Wow.
Because the city of Dwarka was there during the time of Lord Krishna, but after Krishna left this world, the city was covered over by the ocean. So it's kind of similar in that way to Atlantis, you know, the idea that there was some very advanced culture city that got covered by the ocean, but which continues to inspire people. So there have been marine archaeologists who've done diving off the northwest coast of India, off the coast of the present city known as Dwarka on land, and they've discovered what appear to be the remains of the ancient city of Krishna and the waters there. So it's very interesting, and it's a very good documentary that Amish Shah put together.
Wow. Coming up to the end of the show, Michael, a couple of loose questions. What's new for you now? You've got a cruise coming up, I believe, in Alaska?
Yes, I've been invited to be a speaker for a spiritual cruise that's going up to Alaska in June of 2015. There'll be a lot of alternative researchers and healers and psychics and shamans going on that cruise.
Wow.
And what I'm going to be talking about is similarities between the cosmology of the Tlingit Indian people of Alaska and British Columbia and Canada and the Vedic cosmology, because they have some similarities. And I think the reason those similarities are there is because these people from different parts of the world were in touch with the same basic spiritual cosmology that really exists, and therefore there are so many similarities between their worldviews. So it's going to be interesting, you know, for the people who go along to be going up to Alaska, seeing the forests, the glaciers, and the volcanoes, and everything that's up there, the wildlife, and going on some really scenic water routes, and visiting shore places, but also during the cruise there will be the opportunity to hear presentations like mine and those of other speakers. And information about this can be found on my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com, or by going to spiritualcruise.com. And I'd ask that if you do decide to go, list me as your reference. There's an opportunity to do that when you sign up. So that's one thing that's coming up. And in early 2015, in January or February, I'm going to be making a trip to India. And I think either on the way there or the way back, I'd like to visit Angkor Wat in Cambodia, which is a really fascinating ancient temple. I'd like to visit that place.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that are coming up in my life over the course of the next year.
Sure. Of course, you can get that all at mcremo.com. Links everything up there. You get copies of your books there, The Forbidden Archaeologist, all the links there on your web pages. I think you have a web page for every book, Michael. Is that correct?
That's true. Yeah. ForbiddenArchaeology.com, HumanDevolution.com, TheForbiddenArchaeologist.com, MyScienceMyReligion.com, but the central point is mcremo.com, mcremo.com. I've also got my Facebook page, Michael Cremo, It's Really Me. It's a public figure page, and I said it's really me because sometimes a public figure page is not run by the public figure. So those are different ways to keep up with what I'm doing.
Just on what you mentioned with the Alaskan people being linked up with Vedic, a lot of people talk about Sanskrit anomalies around the world, that there's linguistic evidence that Sanskrit was the root language, and I think there's Sanskrit words in South America and stuff like that. Do you look into that, Michael? Do you see any evidence for that?
Well, it's not my main field of research, but of course I'm interested in these things, and I have looked into some of these questions. Of course, it's accepted even by mainstream science that the European languages are related to Sanskrit. They're called the Indo-European language family, so French, Italian, Spanish, most of the European languages are related to Sanskrit, but I think if we cast our net wider, we may also notice similarities. I've seen accounts that do claim that some of the South American languages, like Quechua in the Andes Mountains, are related to Sanskrit. So
wow.
I'm always interested to learn more about those things. It hasn't been the particular focus of my research, but I'm interested in such questions.
Yeah, for sure. Michael, we're at the end of the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. You're welcome back any time, and I hope to see you in Europe when you're over at some point. If you want to stop off here, and I'd love to do a Capricorn TV interview with you in person if you're ever over in London. And great to have you on the show as always, Michael. It's an intelligent conversation and a welcomed one as well. So I thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.